CERIS is very proud to welcome today Dr. Roxane Farmanfarmaian. She graduated from Princeton and got a PhD at Cambridge University. She's now affiliated lecturer at the Department of Politics and International Relations of the University of Cambridge, where she's lecturing the international relations of the Middle East. Dr. Farmanfarmaian, have the events of the Arab uprisings led to a paradigm shift?
Has there been a paradigm shift? I would say that there has been, if we define paradigm shift as a look at a situation that has changed entirely and that we need new models to understand it. And in the Middle East and North Africa, we can see such changes that the population no longer views their governments in the same way they did before. They are no longer afraid of going out into the streets and confronting the police and confronting the political order. And they feel very much as though this has been an independent action. They have done this without outside interference, except for the single exception of Libya, for example. This has been a very local, domestic affair. And finally, it has been a paradigm shift because the people of the region are expressing a degree of independence and a degree of new identity, very much drawn from Islamic paradigms of social order and the way that moral structure should authenticate the lives that they lead. In this way, it is really important that outside powers such as the United States, such as the West, rethink how they have understood the Middle East region and develop new models by which to address policy towards it.
What has been the role of Politic Islam and particularly the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt and in Tunisia?
It is interesting because leading up to the Arab Spring, it did not seem that political Islam had much of a role in the uprisings. Certainly the political Islamic parties had been banned from Egypt and from Tunisia. They'd been co-opted by Algeria and Morocco, and they did not seem to be significant factors in the initial uprisings. However, subsequently, they seemed to be the ones that were able to move in and as organized parties take the electoral process forward and win elections in Nada in Tunisia and the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, for example. But what we must understand is that the private activity of Islamic organization and belief certainly had informed the population of so many of these states, and that was one of the ways that they acted in mute opposition to the repression that was coming down from their governments. And so when the parties were able to reconvene and develop new platforms to go forward into the elections, that in many cases they were able to capture the population's desires to represent their norms and their values and to gain electoral success. We do not see that in Libya, for example, so there are exceptions, but what we're certainly seeing today is that these established Islamic parties are now having to adapt further, because in Tunisia, for example, we're seeing that they've had to step back, and Nada, although it is reconvening a larger and renewed government of national unity, is nonetheless having to reconsider the ways that it represents the Tunisian people, the ways that it handles the Salafist groups that have been increasingly noisy and violent, and how to incorporate that in a formal form of governance. A similar action seems to be on the plate in Egypt, where President Morsi is having to face the pragmatic requirements of governance outside the specific Islamic ideologies that he has tried to push forward in his deal with the army, and the result being that he no longer represents the majority of people inside Egypt. So he too is having to work with his party to come up with a broader platform that works better as a governing arm.
What is, in your view, the impact of the Arab Spring on Iran?
Well, that's an interesting question. Iran has been both a loser and a winner in terms of the Arab Spring. On the one hand, at the time that the Arab uprisings took place, Iran felt that the long-term investment it had made in the Arab street was finally coming to the fore. It had always taken the view that the authoritarian leaderships of Tunisia, of Egypt, were friendly with the United States, were simply promoting a US and Israeli platform in the Middle East, and that the people really did not want this, and it had supported the people in a very anti-Western polemic. Finally, the uprisings were taking place, and this seemed to be the opportunity for the Iranian model to have greater pull inside the Arab world. However, two elements took place. One was the small Arab Spring that took place in Iran was flatly put down, and this lost a great deal of credibility that Iran had enjoyed up until then within the larger Arab world. And second of all, Iran itself had been completely unable to respond to some of the very demands that were in the forefront of the demonstrations of the Arab Spring. It had been unable to provide jobs to its youth. It had been unable to incorporate a sense of dignity by civil action into the government of Iran. So in some significant way it failed on those two counts, and likewise it had been unable to incorporate Iran into the global economic structure, the third demand of the demonstrators in the Arab streets. So it no longer was able to provide what it had hoped would be the next step for the Arab peoples that were rising up. Then, of course, its support of Assad and the Syrian regime seemed to be the death knell on the ability of Iran to have any positive play out of the Arab Spring. However, the way that it has approached what is turning out to be a long-term conflict in Syria is to ensure that it will have a card in the deck as whatever comes out of the Syrian conflict emerges. So it has ensured that it has economic and military placement inside Syria, so that if it turns into a civil war or if Assad should fall, that there is a role for Iran inside Syria. So it can be seen to have kept the Shia arc very much alive, and it is now an arc that is joined by Iraq, and it has become in fact more cohesive as we see the development of an increasing Sunni arc against it. So one can say that it has been a mixed experience for Iran, but it has certainly not diminished Iran to the level that we might have expected.
Final question, how do you see the near future in the region?
To look at the future, well, as an academic, this is not something that we particularly like to take on. We look at trend lines rather than forecasting, but simply for the next several years, there are indications that perhaps I can address. One of them certainly is the fact that the whole region is facing economic problems. It is dire. There are rising unemployment figures that we see both in populations at large as well as particularly in terms of the youth contingent, and there are not good indications as to how that trend line can be shifted. There are no easy solutions to creating a lot more jobs in the economies of the Middle East and North Africa. Likewise, there are significant problems that the population is facing in terms of putting together political structures without conflict that will enable then officials to focus on the economic problems that the region is facing. The region also very likely will be having to deal with security issues. Certain regions and states are more problematic than others, but there's the ongoing, possibly expanding conflict in Syria, which is at the very heart of the Levant. But there certainly are the security issues in North Africa. Libya itself is a very insecure territory, and the entire Sahel region, as we have seen in the recent problems that Algeria faced, and likewise the ongoing conflict in Mali, suggests that this is a security problem that is not going away fast. Finally, it is a region that is having to deal with extremism, and although we're seeing that no state in the Middle East and North Africa has had any difficulty surviving in the face of extremism, they are not threatened per se as nations by extremism. Certainly it is a mechanism that is disconcerting for a population, and it is very bad for the trust that is required for foreign investment. So that too is one of the elements that is an ongoing problem that the region is facing. On the positive side, it is a period in which there is very little foreign intervention, so it is an opportunity for the region itself and the countries individually to deal with their problems on their own. Whether this is through a period that involves quite a bit of conflict and trial and error is to be expected in a period of such change. But the fact of the matter is, at least they are able to do it on their own and find their own solutions so far.